Welcome everyone. We'll get started here in just a minute. We're just going to allow another moment to allow others to get connected, and then we will get started. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you so much for being here for this webinar. Just a few quick announcements before we begin. If you need any assistance today throughout today's event, please use the Q&A function to let us know. We'll address those immediately. The Q&A is the best place to place your questions if you have for our presenters today, and our panelists will try to get to as many questions as possible. As you see questions submitted, you are able to upload those questions or upvote which are most interesting to you. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted for archival viewing, and you'll get an email about that when it's ready. So lastly, if you would like to use the captions function on your screen for today's webinar, click on the CC button on the toolbar you see and click on the show subtitles. Each of you can individually manage that from your screen. So without further ado, I'd love to hand things over to our panelists and presenters to get us going.
Thanks, Cameron, and hello, everyone. We're excited to host this informational webinar for the Transmission Acceleration Grants. This is being funded by GDO, or the Grid Deployment Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. Next slide, please. So just a really quick intro. My name is Taylor Moot, and I'm part of the TWX Hub. The TWX Hub is a new innovation hub managed by RTI International in support of the U.S. Department of Energy. Our goal is to facilitate connections among federal, state, tribal entities, academia, nonprofits, and small businesses all across the U.S., just to name a few types of organizations. To hear any new opportunities that are coming up or updates on the transmission acceleration grants, we recommend you follow our page on LinkedIn, as well as sign up for our newsletter via a link on our website. Next slide, please. Just a few housekeeping things. Cameron went over these, but we do want to kind of emphasize these a bit more. Questions will be handled towards the end of the session, and we're going to be using that Q&A function of Zoom. And what we'll be doing is we'll be first addressing the questions that get the most votes. So if you see a question that's similar to yours, upvote those so that we make sure that we're addressing those first. We might not be able to get through all the questions today, but we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. For any of those that we don't get through, all of those questions will get passed over to DOE, and they'll work to get them answered. Once we have answers for those, both the ones that are addressed in the webinar as well as the ones that come into the Q&A function but are not addressed during the webinar, we will get those posted on the FAQ section of the opportunity page on the TechWorks website. And we'll continue to update that periodically, so please keep an eye on that. Just the last few things, per DOE guidance, we don't allow any AI bots on the webinar, such as Otter AI or any other note-taking AI bots. You shouldn't need them because, one, this webinar is being recorded, and then the transcript will be available on the website as well as the recording. But just so you know, if we see them, they will get kicked out of the session. Last, as another reminder, the webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the TechWorks website within a few business days, along with those slides and transcripts. So you'll be able to see all of this and review it after the fact. Next slide, please. All right, so today we are joined by folks from GDO, Andrea and Liza, and they're going to walk us through the Transmission Accelerated Grants Program. So I will pass it over to you all to get us kicked off.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Andrea Hassan. I'm project manager in the transmission division at GDO, and I am here with my colleague Liza Reed to give you an overview of the Transmission Acceleration Grants Program, also known as TAG. Next slide, please. Before we dive too far into TAG, just a quick note of who we are. GDO works to catalyze the development of new and upgraded electric infrastructure across the country by maintaining and investing in critical generation facilities, developing and upgrading high capacity electric transmission lines nationwide, and deploying transmission and distribution infrastructure and technologies. Next slide, please. All right, the TAG program is an initiative out of the transmission division of GDO, and it's managed through a partnership intermediary agreement with TWX and is designed to provide technical assistance support for state and tribal entities to address growing transmission needs and project backlog through the acceleration and improvement of siting, permitting, and transmission planning. The goal of projects who are awarded TAG funding will be to accelerate transmission development to lower consumer costs and increase grid resiliency, which will benefit all Americans. Next slide, please. TAG does have broad eligibility options and is open to state and tribal entities and those not-for-profit organizations that work directly with the states and tribes. When applying, we do ask that the not-for-profit organizations should specify which states or tribes they are working with and provide support in their application of those entities' participation. The first round of TAG will have up to $10 million available with up to $3 million per project. However, we do expect a wide range of project sizes depending on the scope and scale of need. There is no federal cost share requirement. This means an applicant will not be required to provide matching funds. The project timeline can take up to, but no more than 12 months to complete their proposed work or activities, and it must be related to planning, siting, or permitting of transmission lines at 100 kV or above. Next slide, please. And we do anticipate that there are many different types of opportunities that could be funded through TAG. The four main areas are efforts to identify and or evaluate corridors, zones, or other types of areas that may be designated as preferred locations for siting transmission infrastructure. These can be collaborative, multi-jurisdictional initiatives, or single state efforts. We're also looking at efforts to streamline transmission, siting, and permitting processes and approvals, especially in jurisdictions where permitting authority is spread among many different actors or government entities. We're also looking at efforts to enhance or expand transmission-related activities other than siting and permitting, such as engaging in transmission planning, establishing state or tribal-based funding or financing programs for transmission facilities, pursuing coordination among entities within the state or with other states, or developing new transmission-focused government organizations or other related activities, either encompassing only one state or including multiple states. And finally, we're looking at surge support to increase capacity of state and tribal siting authorities to help meet the rising siting and permitting workloads, particularly where siting and permitting authority faces unprecedented levels of demand. I'll now turn this over to Liza, who will go a bit further into examples of opportunities that we believe could best support transmission needs through the TAG program. And then we'll go over criteria we'll be using to evaluate the applications. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Andrea. As my colleague noted, there's broad eligibility and a wide range of activities that could seek funding under the TAG program. One of the things we wanted to take the opportunity to do today is to walk through some examples. And these are just examples. These are not at the limit of what could be eligible, but we thought it might be helpful to provide some detailed sort of milestones about what a 12-month plan could look like for some specific projects, with the hopes that that helps applicants see themselves in this program, either in an example or to be able to sort of branch off from that example to come up with something that fits their geography and their jurisdictions. All of these topics may not apply to all geographies. It's something to keep in mind as we go through here, particularly when we talk about multi-jurisdictional initiatives or shifting how or streamlining how transmission is reviewed within a state. Because every state and tribal region has a different approach to how they review transmission, these examples that we give have particular sort of structures that are assumed as we walk through the example, but obviously fitting that milestone to how the process works in your region and where you're applying from would be welcome. Additionally, applications must meet the review criteria. So I'll be going through, again, project examples with milestones, but even matching what we propose as a milestone in order to be funded, strong application would still need to meet the review criteria, which I'll go over after I go through these examples. So it's not just about sort of fitting into how we're describing TAG, but also making a very clear case for why this project is relevant to your region, why it is going to accelerate transmission planning, siting, or permitting, and how you can reasonably get done what's proposed in the 12-month period. I'll note here, this is what we explained throughout the examples, is that applications do need to specify outcomes. And sometimes those outcomes are things like holding a meeting, publishing a report, securing means for something. So that's another thing that we'll do here is give some example outcomes. So let's dive in. Next slide, please. I'll start with a planning example. So Andrea mentioned identifying preferred transmission locations. So what might this look like for a state or tribal entity that's applying? Over a 12-month period, if you're looking to improve planning by evaluating corridors in advance of receiving transmission applications, then you might start with holding meetings with developers, relevant departments across the state, and localities to identify where these potential areas might be. Then collect public input on those areas, evaluate and finalize those corridors, which may include evaluating specific proposed infrastructure within the corridor. So are certain corridors better suited to a particular voltage or a particular design, things like this, underground or overhead lines. Then publish a written decision or a report identifying these corridors or even designating these corridors. Again, depending on how the jurisdiction works, it might be simply informational, or there might be some potential for a designation to have some meaning within transmission planning in your region. So you could publish that written decision, again, depending on your timeline in those 12 months, an opportunity for additional feedback or meetings about that report with stakeholders to continue to move the conversation forward. So that's an example of transmission acceleration for evaluating corridors in a planning context. Next slide. Another planning example would be enhancing transmission planning, including something like establishing a new mechanism to support transmission activities and transmission planning. So one of the examples that we give here is financing. These TAG dollars can't be used for financing a transmission line, but they have to be used for the process that is creating or evaluating what financial support could look like. But if an entity was interested in studying or establishing a new funding mechanism or a new means of financial support for transmission in their region, they might start with convening meetings to discuss that purpose, the scope, and the procedures, right? What are we trying to do? Who is it going to apply to, right? Are there particular projects we're trying to attract? Are there particular types? Is it a voltage? Is it a type of energy? Is it a location? What are those procedures on a state or multi-state level that we would need to navigate, right? Really doing a lot of information gathering and level setting. And that could be a series of meetings, right? Each maybe their own milestone to define what that enhanced activity is. And again, in this case, I'm using financing as an example, but we have other examples here planning, coordination across jurisdictions, stakeholder engagement, right? Any of these could work. Then releasing for public comment a draft report. What did all that fact finding discover about what the need is, what the scope would be that makes sense, what would be, a potential structure for what a financial tool could be, how could you fund that financial tool? And then seek comment, review those comments, integrate into a final draft of the report, finalize the report for publication with recommendations or options for establishing or expanding that authority. You'll see there's a theme to these examples. A lot of them are about publishing a final report because we recognize that a lot of the challenges in accelerating transmission is having the time and the bandwidth to study an issue, to study an idea that maybe has existed or been established in one state or one region, but it's not a natural or obvious map over to how that could be implemented in your region, right? And so this is an opportunity to do that studying and figure out what are the regional specific elements that are relevant for establishing such a thing to address transmission in your region. All right, so moving on from planning, next slide, please. Now I'll give two examples on siting and permitting. So one is streamlining transmission permitting. Again, this is another one where I can't emphasize enough. This might not be relevant to all jurisdictions, but in places where transmission siting and permitting is multi-jurisdictional within the state, right, where there's a lot of different touch points where a transmission line has to go through for approval, coordination across those jurisdictions can be really valuable. A form that could take is establishing a single statewide permitting authority or joining together with one or more neighboring states in a shared multi-state permitting authority, or just increasing that coordination, right? Establishing some core group or council or board whose job it is to increase that coordination and communication. Some example milestones towards that end. Again, we'd start with likely convening meetings, right? What is the goal? How would you establish such an authority, right? Who holds the authority to do that? What are the mechanisms available? Publish a report on that process, but then also the implications, right? Because I think that's really important for getting that public comment on the scope and procedures, right? Does this make sense for our region? And then reviewing and summarizing those comments, publishing a final report, and presenting that to the relevant stakeholders and decision makers. So that's a siting and permitting example for how you might streamline transmission permitting. And then the last example I'll give on the next slide, please, is also related to siting and permitting, but it's a little different flavor, and that's looking at increasing capacity. So we know that there are a number of jurisdictions where siting and permitting authorities are facing unprecedented levels of demand. And so what is needed to accelerate transmission reviews is just literally capacity to do transmission reviews. And so if your state or tribal entity is seeking to increase capacity, you might start by securing the means to increase that capacity. And then, and maybe there's multiple times that this needs to happen, multiple stages of securing that capacity, and then beginning that ramp up in evaluation. Complete needed siting and permitting related activities, right? Is it a certain percentage of them? Is it a certain number of them? And provide a report then on the capacities and activities. So then next slide, please. So those are the examples of projects that could be funded under TAG. And again, these are just examples. I can't emphasize enough. Now I'll move over into the review criteria. So we'll have 3 review criteria for this program: technical merit, approach and understanding, and then technical and management capabilities. And you'll see how those reviews will be weighted across those 3 criteria. And I'll dive into the details. Next slide, please. So we'll start with technical merit. This is 50% of the evaluation. And we provide a number of details here. These are available on the TWX website as well. But we're looking for the thoroughness of the description and implementation plan, right? Have you described a project that makes sense, that can be, and what do we mean by make sense? Can it be achieved in a year, right? Does your budget fit with what's proposed, with the schedule, with the milestones? And have you demonstrated that this strategy, or at least well argued that this strategy will accelerate transmission in terms of expediting, documenting, or streamlining the siting, permitting, or planning, right? Whichever sort of activity you're pursuing. And then, of course, can you also demonstrate that DOE funding is necessary for achieving these activities, right? Is this something that wouldn't be possible or maybe wouldn't move as quickly without support from the Department of Energy? Moving on to the next criteria. Next slide, please. Is that technical approach and understanding. So this is the next most heavily weighted at 35%. And so this is about the details of the approach towards accomplishing the goals. So the first half is just about the overall soundness and strength of the proposal. And then here is what is the innovativeness and feasibility of your approach for coordinating, for standardizing, for informing, right? Like, what are you proposing? And how is what you're proposing sort of consistent with what is understood as best practices or innovative approaches to accomplishing your goals? And is there a logical progression of the work of what you're proposing? Next slide, please. And then finally, that last 15% is on the technical capabilities and the management capabilities. So this is demonstrating that you have the right team to accomplish this work. One of the things that Andrea mentioned is if the proposal is led by a nonprofit, where part of this is looking for a demonstration that there is a state or tribal entity or more than one state or tribal entity actively involved in the project. That is a really important part of this, is that this work is about supporting state and tribal entities in their transmission efforts and in their transmission activities. So are the necessary partnerships in place? Do the folks who are engaged on the project have the experience and the capabilities to accomplish the task? Does the project organization make sense, including subrecipients? And are the personnel and facilities in place? Next slide, please. So that summarizes the review criteria. And then finally, I'll just wrap up with some important dates. Our application opened 2 weeks ago on October 31st. And here we are on the second line here, November 13th, with the objective strategic session, providing an informational overview of the proposal. There's 2 more times that GDO and TWX will be available in this format. We have 2 office hours in the next 2 months. So during the application period, we have an office hour on December 3rd, and then another one on January 14th. That's 1 week before the applications are due, to help answer any final questions or provide clarity where we can to folks who are interested in pursuing this opportunity. Those are voluntary sessions, of course, optional sessions. And then the application deadline will be January 21st, early next year at 5 p.m. And we have the expectation that selectees will be announced in June of next year. Next slide, please. That's our overview for today. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it back over to Taylor to handle questions.
Awesome. Thank you for the presentation, and everyone, thank you for the questions you have in here so far. Again, please keep adding questions. Please keep upvoting. As I said before, we will go to the questions that have been with the most upvotes first, and we'll work our way down. Okay, so first question is, can one application include both a planning and permitting activity?
Yes, absolutely. We gave those examples in a narrow scope, but you do not have to select within. I just encourage folks who are applying to think through the budget and the timeline about what you can accomplish in a 12-month period.
Great. All right, next question is, and I think this is a little specific to the organization, but think we can think about it in a little bit more broader as well. So the question is, can a tribal entity apply for a surge grant for their permitting agency if another agency at the tribe won a transmission grant that's in fact causing this need for new work?
That's a really interesting question. I agree, Taylor. I think that seems a little specific and hard to answer without more details, but in terms of eligibility questions generally, if folks want to submit them, we're happy to provide a more careful review and put answers as we have them up on the website.
So we'll follow up with that one and any ones that are a little bit more specific, and you should see that one or a version of it on the TechWorks website, the FAQ section, and then you're also welcome to email us directly, and we'll put the email in the chat here shortly if there are any other nuances that you want to make sure that we understand. Next question, again, is a little specific, but I'm going to kind of do my best to generalize it. If one of the folks on the call is representing a utility, how might they work with the states, the PUCs, the tribes, et cetera, to pursue this program to help educate, I can never say that word. Educate transmission project utilities transmission projects that utilities are developing.
I would encourage utilities to reach out to the state and tribal entities that they work with and make them aware of this opportunity and encourage them to pursue it, to come to our Q&A sessions to learn more about it. It sounds like there's probably a very strong case the utility can make if they are already experiencing issues from unprecedented demand, then hopefully those can be robust and meaningful conversations that can result in a strong application.
Great. Next question is, okay, this is a long one. In the last example that you showed, the one about increasing siting and permitting capacity, would the grant proposal need to restrict the increased capacity to be used solely for the boost the capacity of the reviewing authority to review and make siting and permitting decisions on the proposed transmission project? Or could the increased capacity also be used to review and make decisions on proposed generation projects?
These milestones are about transmission. So in terms of what we will be evaluating and what the funding would be evaluated against would be the success at accelerating transmission.
Thanks. Okay, next question is, will DOE or TechWorks be doing any project concept pre-review? I will say on our side.
That's not something that DOE is offering, but TechWorks, I don't know if you had perspective that you wanted to share on that. We do have those Q&A sessions available.
Yeah, so we can't comment on specific concepts, but we can provide high-level guidance around what is in scope and what is out of scope. So if there's more specific questions, you can follow up in this chat or join another one of the webinars, as well as email TechWorks directly, and we can do our best to give you guidance within what we are allowed to. Another question, and the next question is, can recipients of GRIP awards be eligible for this funding?
Again, we'll put eligibility questions online, but the eligibility is largely about the type of entity and not other activities or other awards that the applicants may be engaged in.
Next question is permitting for transmission lines permitting for transmission lines on reservations typically takes 12 to 24 months, but can be sometimes extended longer depending on a lot of different additional components. In this application process, if it does take that long, does that make this application ineligible?
Thanks for this question, because it'll help me talk through what I think I may have postured poorly in that example. There's a lot of actions in that 12 to 24 month period that it takes to permit transmission lines on a reservation. I think that's also true in many jurisdictions. I don't think that is unique to reservations as well. And so when we think about increasing capacity and providing a review of what capacity has been increased and what permitting reviews have been able to move forward because of the increase, I would encourage applicants to think about how you would want to measure that, right? Because the receipt of a permit doesn't have to be the only measurement of your ability to increase capacity and be moving projects through, right? It isn't about have you approved, 50 more projects or something, or 5 more projects, or even 1 more project. It's about there's potential to put milestones about your processes. So are there a number of steps, and you've been able to move more projects through more steps, or existing projects through more steps? So I wouldn't necessarily say ineligible, but hopefully that explains a little bit more about how we think about increasing capacity when we're only talking about a 12-month grant.
Great. And I think I'm going to jump to a follow-up question. I think that you answered some of this, but I do want to just pose it in case there's anything else that you want to add. Can applicants break up the planning process into discrete tasks and prepare the report to be used in, for example, a NEPA process?
Again, I cannot pre-review an idea, but I would say that is consistent with the clarification that I just provided, and I appreciate folks thinking through with these examples.
Great. You've laid this out a little bit in the presentation already, but can you outline any additional key components required in the application, including any specific templates or formats? And I can follow up with what we have from TWX too.
There is a template available online. We highly encourage folks to use the template, and it walks through background, what the proposed project is, what the team is, and it has a milestone template that we also ask you to fill out. It's I'm going to forget my numbers here. There's nothing like saying numbers live. I believe it's a 7-page maximum, and we put comments throughout the template about where we would encourage applicants to consider particular merit review criteria. So I highly recommend looking at the template as you're building your application and considering how you are fitting those merit review criteria across the different components.
And I'll just augment within that template, you'll see that there's 1 page for a cover page, there's up to 4 pages for the project description, as well as objectives, and then an additional 2 pages for the project work plan and budget. You'll see in the chat that Kira just dropped a link to where you can see all of that information. So when you go in there, you can press the apply button, it'll just log you in, and you can see all the questions that will be asked. As well as if you just stay on that main page, you'll be able to download that template and look at it directly. Next question is, how is the TAG program different from the Tribal Nations Transmission Program that GDO also offers?
We have a GDO conductor that does a far better job than I will live at explaining the differences between our funding opportunities. But there are areas where you may see overlaps, but we've tried to differentiate to the extent that we can. I don't know the specifics of the Tribal Nations transmission program through NREL off the top of my head, but I do recall, I believe it's technical assistance and sort of direct support from NREL, if memory serves. And so this is just broader and provides more mechanisms for topics and solutions that tribes could pursue. But I would encourage you to review the conductor, and then happy to follow up in the frequently asked questions with a more specific and detailed response after the fact. Hopefully I have not mischaracterized that Tribal Nations transmission program.
And we will, TechWorks will drop the link to that conductor program here in the chat shortly, so you all can access that as well. Yep, so that's still in there. Okay, so the next question, and I'm going to direct this one to TechWorks. Adam, if you're ready. Can you please clarify what the source of funding for this opportunity is? I couldn't find it in the opportunity documents, and I think I could be reading this wrong, so others jump in. I think it's a question. Well, I will first turn it over to Liza and Andrea, and then if we want to talk about the PM mechanism, we can also do that.
I was just going to briefly say the source of funding is through a partnership intermediary agreement. And so if Robert wants to provide more details on that, I would cede the floor to him.
Sure, yeah. So we have an agreement in place with RTI. They are set up under a PIA, which DOE has authority under Title 15, 3715. And so they act as our PIA provider in this opportunity. And so through that, the potential performers will actually enter into, if selected, business-to-business agreements directly with the TechWorks team in order to complete the tasks and activities that they have submitted for. So I'll pause there.
Awesome, thank you. This is another eligibility question. So I'm going to pose it, but we can also take it offline and follow up on the FAQ. If a utility, for example, like a public power district, is considered a not-for-profit, sorry, would that make them eligible to apply for this opportunity?
I agree, Taylor. We'll have to sort of continue to discuss specifics in frequently asked questions, but at minimum, just a reminder that a non-for-profit entity can apply, but must demonstrate that they are working directly with a state or tribal entity on siting or permitting or planning. And so the goal of including eligibility for non-for-profit entities is to provide sort of a broader umbrella for what those partnerships could look like, but the focus of the Transmission Acceleration Grant Program is on supporting transmission activities at the state and tribal level.
I have another question that we might not be able to answer, but it is the last one left, so I'm going to posit it and we can defer. Is there any anticipated schedule for future rounds of funding beyond this initial one? Sorry.
We don't have a schedule available to share, but we do have the expectation of being able to open future rounds if there is funding availability. If the 10 million that we currently have available and any additional funds are not already granted in this first round.
Great. We are just rolling through questions as they're coming in now, but again, if these are relevant to you all, feel free to like them, feel free to add your own questions. We do have quite a bit of time, so we're here to help you in any way that we can. In the next question is, will there be any ongoing technical assistance or support provided to the grantees during the project implementation phase? I will say on the TechWorks side, no. There is not specific support that we will be providing once you are a grantee, but I'll let GDO ask or answer provide any additional details. Sorry.
Thanks, Taylor. We have not currently structured specific technical assistance or support. If it is valuable to a program to be requesting regular meetings or specific things with the Department of Energy or with the Grid Deployment Office, I think that would be valuable to reference in your application and could be part of a milestone as necessary.
The next set of questions are a bit specific to individual circumstances that I think are outside of the scope of this opportunity. But I will ask Andrea and Liza to feel free to read those and just triple check. Otherwise, we'll have to kind of wait for other ones to come in that we can really answer within the scope of this opportunity.
Thanks, Taylor. I would agree. We've provided what we can informationally in terms of the scope, and we can continue to review questions again and update them in the frequently asked questions as folks provide more clarification on what they're seeking. Thank you.
All right. We have a couple minutes left before we kind of wrap up. I do want to be conscious that others may be kind of formulating questions and things like that. So I think I'll give us another couple of minutes of kind of just waiting to see what else comes in. And then if not, we might wrap a little bit early and kind of go through the last steps. Okay, new question. Are there any specific resources or templates available to help ensure that any applications meet NEPA or any other interagency requirements?
For this funding, we don't have any specific templates related to NEPA or NHPA. The templates we're providing are solely on the application for the funding.
All right, we'll give it another couple of minutes and then we will transition over to kind of wrap up here. So for those of you that are still on the line, if you have any questions about any clarifications, questions, please go ahead and drop those in and we'll do our best to answer them. Yeah, unfortunately, we can't answer questions that are super specific about an individual circumstance or provide a lot of guidance around other mechanisms to obtain funding, but we do recommend look at the GDO conductor. That's where the GDO's Funding opportunities are listed, so if you're looking for other mechanisms to pay for things, that could be a good source. But again, unfortunately, we can't provide specifics on individual cases. We can do our best to extrapolate to broader ones, but again, I think that's unfortunately the position that we're in today. All right. Well, what we'll do is, given time and given the questions that are coming in, I think what makes sense is for any questions that are still remaining, we'll put the TechWorks email in the chat here in a moment. And please send us any questions that you have, and we'll do our best to facilitate those or get them to the right people to get them answered. So again, please go ahead and email us, and we'll do our best to get what information we can to you all. So with that, we appreciate you all joining us, and thank you for the time and the questions and the conversation. We really appreciate it and hope that you all are as excited about this as we are. Here we have a kind of our wrap-up slide. So it has the link to it has a QR code that's a brief post-webinar survey. So if you do want to provide any feedback on the webinar, please go ahead and scan that and provide any feedback that you have. All the information from today, the recording, the transcript, the slides, as well as any of the questions that we discussed today, and well as ones that were submitted, as we said we can't answer immediately, but we'll try to get back to. All of that will get updated to our website within a couple of business days, and you'll get an email once the recording of this is ready. So keep an eye on that, and yeah, thank you all for being here.